party to this. Maybe he brought her the drugs, or he's using other drugs, or he's engaged in this activity with her. As the opioid epidemic started to ramp up and overdose deaths started to ramp up, what we were seeing was the people that were a party to it, they didn't want to call 911. They didn't want to summon help. Why? Because they feared arrest. So there's been all sorts of changes to the laws and the policies and things like that. So now I have a user that I cannot arrest, and I have a contributor, maybe a fellow user, a party to it. He's got immunity. I can't arrest him either. Another point, heroin and the use is very different from other drugs. It's not like somebody who goes out and purchases a big bag of marijuana and maybe they smoke a little bit of it and then they keep their stash, or maybe they give some to their buddy or resell it or do whatever. They smoke a little and they keep a little or do whatever. Or with cocaine, powder cocaine, or pills or methamphetamine or whatever, fill in the blank. The heroin user scores the drug and they use it immediately. The end stage users, a gram of heroin is on the street 120 to 160 bucks. They are so far gone, they can't afford it. They can't afford 120, 160 bucks. So that's why when we respond to these overdose incidents, death or no death, we rarely find the drug present. Whatever drug that is involved is in the person's body. And that's why a gram is a felony 5. We cannot arrest you because we rarely have it there. Another point is this is an enormous supply and demand business. So my people cannot arrest the user. They can't arrest the user's buddy. Our alternative here is to attack the supply. And that's with like the Heroin Task Force and the Coalition Task Force. Those investigators are going after their suppliers. And it's important to note, they're not only going after these people for drug trafficking and drug possession charges, they're launching investigations to try to link the dealer, the sale, and the product to the person that is overdosed and died. Because we don't want to send them away for 4 or 5 years on a drug charge. We want to send them away for 25 years on a manslaughter charge. So does that make sense? And they're inundated. The Heroin Task Force, our people, we've got 3 sheriff's deputies assigned to that. They're inundated and they're catching 3 to 4 new cases a week. Now I'm going to hit you where it hurts. There is a complete history and backstory to these people that are dying. Now I am absolutely not saying that one life is more important than another. I am absolutely not saying that these people aren't worth their time. That is not what I'm saying, so please do not misquote me here. But oftentimes, there is a lengthy history. I want to remind the public, and this is where I start to get a little irritated, when somebody comes in and says, the cops aren't doing anything. When we are called, when Chief Penny's people are called, we are the last ditch effort. We're the end of the road. For the dealers and the sellers, the only thing beyond us is prison or death. For the users, it's probably death. You folks, not you folks, the community calls us when everything else, every other resource, every other mechanism, everything else has failed. We weren't in the church. We weren't in the schools. We weren't on the playgrounds. We weren't in the family room. Everyone else and everything else has failed. So it's a little bit unreasonable, and I'm not saying anyone has done this tonight. I've heard it in the past. For a person to come into a public meeting, to point at law enforcement and say, you need to do more.
And I think you will find that there won't be anybody in this room that would do that. I think what we're doing is saying, let's make the environment that these people come into inhospitable and make your job more streamlined. And we don't blame you. We support.
And I appreciate that genuinely from the bottom of my heart.
We don't support the rest of what's going on here.
So
even with the EMS, when we make an overdose run, we don't stop right there. Our run reports go to the sheriff's department that gets forwarded right to the drug correlation and the drug force team.
Do you have addresses on those runs?
Please?
Do you have addresses on those runs where these are occurring at?
Oh, yeah.
So an update for the specific heroin overdose death from the weekend, I believe it was September 8th. It was that weekend. Since that has occurred, the sheriff's office doesn't have a street level drug unit. We've got a large regional narcotics unit, and that is a large undercover drug operation. But we don't have, unfortunately, a street level plainclothes drug unit that can rove from one community to another. And that is something that our detective supervisors have been lobbying for a long time. Everyone discussed budget earlier. You can't pay for everything, unfortunately, right now. That's not something that we can create and sustain. So I have a particular sergeant on night shift who has undercover drug experience before becoming a supervisor. He was an investigator, and he said if staffing will allow, and if we can get our hands on some vehicles and things of that nature, will you let me run with this? Absolutely, certainly. It's a good idea. At least we can start putting some pressure on some of the folks in your area that are doing this stuff. The weekend of, I believe it was the 22nd of September, it was 2 weekends after the overdose incident. We had some officers working in plain clothes because staffing and equipment allowed it. And we were literally stopping anything and everything that moved through High Point. And I was told that it got out pretty quickly on social media within a matter of hours, and it was the cops are harassing us in High Point. We had legitimate reasons for traffic stops. We had equipment violations. We had clear-cut traffic moving violations. We're not in the business of trampling on people's rights or harassing anybody, but we did stop a lot of cars that night and over the course of that weekend. One effort, one initiative creates another set of issues. So for a solid week, all I did was field complaints about how we were stopping everybody. And ma'am, you're laughing, you must know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
All right, well, help me out here. So I fielded several complaints that there was no reason for me to be stopped and you didn't need to run the dog around my car and so on and so forth. Yes, sir.
There was an incident where a gentleman was in High Point with one license plate and no front license plate,
Yes,
and he was stopped.
correct.
And there was a problem, and it come out on the social media and stuff that they were harassment, like you said, and stuff. But people was tell the people in High Point that the police are here.
Well, and that's another point I'm gonna get to.
And it did make sense because it hadn't been but a few days before that they were asking those same police officers to come and look for these drugs.
Well, we're not going to tell people, when we have the ability to conduct any sort of clandestine operation, we're not going to tell people what we're doing. We're not going to tell drug dealers, drug buyers, drug users, we're not gonna say, here we come, you know, that, and word gets out in High Point pretty darn quickly. So we have to act fast when we can do it.
Well, the rumor is there's a, how they call it, thing to spread the word. I guess that's the
Social
simplest
media,
word. No, and
Framework.
throughout the neighborhood.
Grapevine.
Grapevine, yeah, that's good, whatever. But it's just, if the word comes out, then it's all through the neighborhood.
the last thing that I kind of want to throw at you is people are curious to know what's being done. And that investigation into that overdose death is still pending. I will not come into a public meeting and discuss status, disposition. I will not discuss plans or tactics, methods. I can't do that. I cannot jeopardize an ongoing criminal investigation. Now, I can tell you that there were several people in that house that weekend. Within 3 days of that overdose death, one of those individuals was arrested, and to my knowledge, is still sitting in the Hamilton County Justice Center. Now, I'm not going to tell you who, and I'm not going to tell you what they were arrested for, because it is directly linked to that whole thing. We know who the players are, and as I've voiced to a couple of the trustees and others, and Mr. Bickford, these numbers in High Point, in a textbook fashion, reflect what the FBI puts out every year on crime stats. You've got 6 or 7% of the population committing 60 or 70% of the crime, and again, you're nodding your heads. You see it. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
mean, I don't know the scenario that you're
I'm
talking about.
referring to-
They're like,
Sorry about that, I'm looking at everybody in this direction.
The other thing too, that when you start looking at heroin, the amount of heroin overdoses on numbers, you know where we get a lot of our heroin overdoses? The parks and gas stations. They're not residents. They're not resident houses. We get people that travel from other communities and they find a park or they find an area. We've had, I can't tell you how many that have been on, that took a dose of heroin in a parking lot and they stopped to get gas and they died right at the gas pump. I mean, they come from all over and they're travelers, like I said, they're hitchhikers. They're not, it's not as much as an isolated area. We've had a couple in Jewish hospital parking lot.
Connect those EMS runs and those zoning violations so that we can start and do quickly say, oh, there's zoning violations here and this is a place we really need to be watching, that you know, it's like a Richter scale, there's rumblings here. We are in the age of computers where there's fast sharing of information if we have a way to do it. But maybe they're not connected. Maybe the maintenance issues that
No,
Heroin is having,
we don't. When
these things don't have anything to do with
when
each
they
other.
read the reports for the
This is a month later.
properties that they deal with, I pay attention to that, and there's not related really to a drug house versus high grass and things of that nature. They're usually, and like I said, we have very few residents where there's a repeated offense at that same house all the time, because like I said, these people move around, and we get these drug overdoses all over. It's hard to tell them where they're going to be. Like I said, gas station parking lots, the parks everywhere, you know, and you find out the person lives in Deer Park or lived in, you know, some down Pleasant Ridge, you know, and they just pick that spot. So.
And I don't mean to just pick on, or just use High Point. This is all over this township. If there is a community that is having a problem, if lighting is what they need, we don't need excuses. We need to get on it. If there are zoning violations, if there's a business being run out of a residential community, that needs to be done yesterday. And there are tools, there are tools we can put in a toolbox as a township, as a community, to make it inhospitable for these people.
I'd like to speak to that just in a roundabout way. There's a lot of, I don't want to use the word complaining because I don't want to make light of anyone's situation here tonight, their agenda or their wishes or concerns. I'm not doing that. But I'm going to tell you, as a person who doesn't live in Sycamore Township, most of you do, all of you folks do. I'm going to tell you right now, as a person who does not reside in this township, this is one heck of a nice place to exist.
We want to keep it
This is
that way.
a great place to live. This is a great place to seek entertainment, to work. There are great schools, public and parochial, all over this township and neighboring bailiwicks. I'm telling you, take it from me, both as an outsider and as a law enforcement official, Sycamore Township is a darn nice place to be. Index crimes in this township are almost non-existent. All the way down to simple assaults. We will occasionally have something, but sexual assaults, felonious assaults, homicides, robberies, aggravated robberies, we're talking single digits, and we're 10 months into the year. Most of the issues that we see are petty thefts, auto crashes, quality of life issues. You can divide these crimes into two different categories. Those that are inconvenient and annoying and things that we don't like to see and hear and deal with, and then those that are life-altering. Your car's been stolen, you've been stabbed outside of the town center or something like that. You're a victim of a sexual assault or something heinous. Those are two categories. I'm here to tell you, and now something will happen tonight. Murphy will get involved. The index crimes, the serious heinous crimes in Sycamore Township are in the basement. Now, I don't know what to attribute that to, but this is a darn nice place to live. We're responding to roughly 1,000 calls of service, calls for service a month. That number varies, but we exceed 1,000 radio runs per month, and then we have between 600 and 700 incidents of self-initiated activity per month, and that number varies too, but it's right between 6 and 7 And those are incidents where officers are getting out on their own, making traffic stops, you know, going in and talking to certain people, things of that nature. I don't know if I've made any headway here tonight. I don't know if I've got anybody on my side. For me and my people to succeed, we need the community's cooperation and help. We can't sit here and trade punches. We have to be unified in this. And these are some of these great ideas. And Kathy, we've spent some time together. You know me, so I'm committed. We're gonna have a conversation. Ma'am, your name escapes me. I'm sorry. In the back. We're gonna talk next week. But despite the problems and the issues, this is still a darn nice place to be and exist and raise your kids and have fun. That's
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Ferris, can I just address you for one thing? I want you to know that this board is very, very serious about this issue. Last year, we hired 4 additional police officers, so a full 24-hour car running nonstop every day. And we also invested in a renew officer for regional narcotics unit, which we don't really talk about that much because we like it to be low profile because we hope we might catch somebody. But we invested in $120,000 in one of those officers as well. Only one of 2 townships in Hamilton County that did that. So we're very serious about it here. We know it's a problem. You know, I say it's a problem that goes from Price Hill to Indian Hill. It doesn't really matter where you're at. This is a horrible problem, and we're attempting to address it. But
So we all need to
as
work together.
Yeah, it's about dialogue.
And we
Absolutely.
need to have proactive,
That's why I called it.
the arrests are after the fact, and they're important, but let's put on our thinking caps. I don't have all the ideas,
And
but.
Kath, we can't arrest our way out of the problem. Even if
No,
we could
we
arrest in
cannot
that
get on
scenario,
the
it's
front
not.
end.
Suggesting that.
No, I'm not saying you
I don't hear anything
are.
about that, and I don't have the ideas, but let's find out, let's keep this a great place. I think I live in a vulnerable neighborhood, that's why I'm bringing this up. But maybe they're all vulnerable, and I think we need to be thinking about township-led planning, if nothing else. Or let's talk about what are best practices to preventing. That's what I'm asking, and my little ideas were just that, very little. But there are good ideas out there somewhere, and let's get a hold of them, and let's do something with them.
I attended a meeting today of the Hamilton County Heroin Coalition. Mr. Fortin was there also, he can attest to the fact that I was there. And also attest to the fact that other than the chair, Commissioner Driehaus, there were no other government officials at that meeting. This coalition is primarily focused on prevention and treatment and education, not on law enforcement, although they do have law enforcement representation on their steering committee. I told them at that meeting, the question was asked at the end of the meeting about communications and how they could get more information out about their programs. There's quite a few private, nonprofit organizations and some government organizations who are represented on the steering committee, and they have various programs on prevention, education, treatment, things like that. I asked them, do you have a network for communicating any activities or programs out into the various communities outside of Hamilton County's own? It didn't appear to me that they did, but I said, get your information to us. We've got a website, we've got a Facebook page, we've got a newsletter where we can help you pass along and push out the information that they're trying to get out to the community on ways. They've got some prevention numbers that are actually pretty good in the school, at the school level.
See, I think we should have a committee working on that, because just pushing stuff out is good, but we need a committee vetting it. Which ones would work for us? Which ones do we need to put some money behind perhaps, or find a way to get things out? I mean, I'm so glad you went. Kudos for you for doing that. But I think we need to step beyond just putting a link on a website.
There were several activities that they were promoting. All of them were, they were not focused on government-led programs. They were community-led programs. Coalitions of residents, and I asked the question at the meeting, who puts these coalitions together? They said pastors, principals, concerned parents, residents, the neighborhood. come to these organizations and say, let's form neighborhood coalitions in our communities.
Was
to do this
government
kind of
left
thing.
out of that, or it doesn't have a role in it?
I don't know that they don't have a role, they can certainly support, but, these were community, they were citizen-focused activities. So that's gotta be a part of it as well.
I appreciate what you said, Mr. Reapan, I really do. It's comforting to know that I chose to live here, I made a good choice. And obviously you, are attesting to that. But we have got to get on top of this as a nation, and the only way to do that is community by community.
Can Eddie? He's been very patient.
If I can get up here. Anyway, I have some signs that we wanna see if you people will help us pay for. And, so we can put them up in High Point. I'm a resident of High Point on 11937 3rd Street. And, I also have a estimate from a company here in Sycamore Township that would make these signs. 50 of them at $10.25 each. Stakes are $1 each. It adds up to $562.50. Sales tax $39.38. $601.88. And I guess the next thing is,
How many of those signs,
huh?
how many signs did you say?
50.
50.
That's not an exorbitant expense, but I would also suspect you could probably get a business to do this, pick
Well-
up that entire cost and sponsor it.
It is, there's a sign at the outfit that would make them, you know, but I don't know. I've just been involved in this for the last few days,
How
so,
big are they?
huh?
How big are they?
That's the size
This is the
of them.
size you're looking for, just 8 by 11?
Oh, 8.5 by 11,
Huh? Yeah.
No, it'd be a regular yard sign.
a yard sign.
So this is something that the county, through the Heroin Task Force, produced years ago. And that was one of the reasons I went to the meeting today, to see if they had some in a warehouse, but there are none, and they said that they do not have any funds to make any more.
Where would these signs go? Just in people's yards?
Yeah.
For High Point.
The gentleman that lost his daughter up there in High Point over the last month, he's very perturbed. But we've talked, and he's talked about taking his truck